Well, I want to do a little bit of a deep dive on the University of Oregon State. Take a look at what's going on right now. What is their current value and what does their future look like? Obviously, something happening these past few weeks really, really bad for their program. Seems like them and Washington State right now on the outside looking in. California might soon follow, depending on what happens with their talks with the ACC. But guys, I'm going to lay it all out on the table right now. What are the big options if you are Oregon State? And I'm going to say what I think they should do. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, worst possible news at the worst possible time. Oregon State athletics faces uncertain future, growing debt, including stadium remodel. So Oregon State just completed an 162 massive remodel to their stadium, including an increased capacity to more than 43,000. It looks absolutely beautiful. The issue is, just as that gets completed, just as the investment into their football program comes to fruition, their conference completely implodes, just like the Titan submersible. And it's very, very sad because it's literally the worst time possible. But where will Oregon State go? That stadium renovation makes them a lot more attractive for sure. They're kind of a team right now that seems on the rise. The DJ Uiagalelei, five-star QB transfer, possibly going to be a good season. You take a look at their schedule. Kind of a weird start to the year at San Jose State on a Sunday. Okay. Then they get UC Davis, home game with San Diego State, at Washington State. You can make an argument they should be 4-0. I mean, they might lose to Washington State, but those are 4 winnable games. San Diego State might be iffy as well. You get Utah at home. Could you imagine Oregon State being 4-0, a Friday night home game with Utah with a 5-star quarterback having a resurgence? Oh, you gotta love it if you're Oregon State. At California, that's winnable. Versus UCLA, that's winnable. At Arizona, at Colorado. These are all very winnable games. Versus Stanford, versus Washington, and then the tough game at Oregon. That was formerly called the Civil War. They changed it for some reason. That was a great nickname for a rivalry. And then the whole question is, what happens to the Civil War, the Oregon versus Oregon State game? It will very likely go by the wayside. I do not see Oregon, especially with the future model that I expect college football to adopt. It would be a 10-game conference schedule that would leave Oregon only 2 non-conference games, and I don't think they would have a permanent non-conference game with Oregon State. So that rivalry, that in-state rivalry, unfortunately will likely go by the wayside. If Oregon and Oregon State chose to play in football, it could take up to years to schedule the new matchups based on the current non-conference schedules of both of those teams. Each remaining Pac-12's team's desirability rating. This was done last year by Sports Illustrated. Unfortunately for Oregon State, they were ranked last in these rankings by Sports Illustrated when it comes to the Pac-12 teams, ranked 67th overall. Now, their viewership was actually a little bit better, coming in at 7th in the conference last year. But I'm going to take a look at the 2 major potential plays if you're Oregon State, because let's be honest, right now, do any of us really know exactly what's going to happen? They have a conference in 2024 that is going to be 4 teams. That's just not, something has to happen here. So if you're Oregon State, I think your 2 biggest hopes right now would be possibly joining the Big 12. That might be a little bit unrealistic depending on the Big 12's current plans. I know there's been rumors the Big 12 is done with expansion right now. They might focus on next year. And they also, if they do expand, it might be more of a UConn and San Diego State type route, which would be more of a basketball route than adding Oregon State and Washington State. I do think wherever Oregon State goes, that's where Washington State's going to go, and vice versa. Both of those teams seem to be entwined at the hip right now, just based off of the current factors we have in the world of college football. And the more realistic scenario, there's also a third option, which would be a super conference. It'd be like a group of 5 super conference. I don't think that's happening because that would take a lot of effort from the American, from the Mountain West, and then you would add the Pac-4 teams. But the really realistic option, this was kind of rumored. I said it a few weeks ago, or maybe like a week ago, when I came out with a video talking about what happens to the Mountain West. The idea is the Mountain West just adds Washington State and Oregon State, and then maybe also California. Now, obviously, Stanford is certainly not going to the Mountain West, but Oregon State right now, they are a team on the rise. When you look at their schedule, it sets up, even though the Pac-12 is good this year, they don't face USC. They've got a lot of nice home games. They've got Utah at home on a Friday. It is a favorable schedule now. I know DJ Uiagalelei struggled last year. I'm not really talking about their team, but I do think it kind of factors in if Oregon State goes into this season with virtually no conference home in 2024, them having a really good season and getting better ratings in terms of TV, that's going to give them a nice bargaining chip, and they've got this brand new stadium, and they could possibly have some big-time home games. Maybe they get a college game day if they're 4-0, a Friday game. Well, actually, that wouldn't be college game day because that game is on a Friday, but I'm just saying they can really help themselves. It seems like they're blossoming right before our eyes, and it is so sad that they make this major investment into their football program only to see the implosion happen virtually immediately after, and now they're in significant debt trying to pay it back. You know, they add the capacity up to 43K, huge renovation, thinking they're going to be in the Pac-12, they're going to host Oregon, they're going to host all these teams. Well, yes, this year they are going to host a lot of big teams, but after that, the house of cards has completely collapsed, and you're looking at just 4 teams in your conference, and you're either hoping the Big 12 throws you a bone and you get to join that conference probably at a significantly discounted rate with Washington State, or possibly the Mountain West. You know, I'm just going to throw this out. This is not happening, but the other thing is, could you imagine the ACC, because ESPN is so angry that Fox has basically full control over the 10:30 Eastern window because they have all the Pac-12 teams now in the Big Ten? Could you imagine the ACC forming their own West Wing with the remaining Pac-4 schools? I don't think it can happen unless ESPN helps fund the travel problems, but how about a rival West Wing? How about that scenario? I just thought of it randomly while I was making a video, honestly. And listen, you know, again, it's very, very unlikely, but I do think that could mitigate the travel problems, because right now the whole idea of Stanford and California to the ACC, it doesn't make sense in terms of travel, in terms of the cost of it, discounted rate. I know ESPN has said they'll pay for some of it, because I do think ESPN really wants that 10:30 window that Fox currently has a stranglehold on. Would the ACC say, screw it, we're going full offense, we're expanding significantly just like the Big 12, and we're going to bring on Oregon State and Washington State as a way to mitigate travel, because we're also bringing on Stanford and California, and then if you're Oregon State, you just hit the jackpot. You're in a Power 4 conference, you're in the ACC, and you've got a beautiful stadium, and now you're going to get great home field advantage, from a team like Clemson traveling up there, or FSU going to a cold environment. But that is just a way far out scenario. I still think the most realistic option is the most boring one, and it would just be Washington State and Oregon State joining the Mountain West. Whether or not California follows, I don't know. I believe Stanford goes independent for a year and then joins the Big Ten next summer. That is my current working theory, so I would say right now, it's got to be tough for Oregon State fans. Do they get into the Big 12? Is it the Mountain West? Is it possibly something crazy like this Group of 5 Super Conference where you take the best teams from the American, you take the best teams from the Mountain West, and you add the Pac-4, and you say, this is a Power 5 league because we're taking the best from everywhere, and we still have the Pac-4 to give us that, big status that's going to give us a lot of benefits. It is all on the table, but it's, this is a big year for Oregon State football, because they could really raise their value if, they can't find anywhere to go going into this season. If they play well, if they show, the new stadium, the big renovation, the $150 million, great atmosphere. You do have a favorable schedule. I'm not saying this team is crazy talented, but I do think there is an opportunity for them to really be relevant in the college football world. That's something that's really been lacking, and maybe even push themselves above Washington State in terms of value, although I really don't think that matters all that much, considering both of those teams are so similar and they're kind of intertwined at the hip. And you're looking at what was the Pac-12 and you're seeing the power structure of it come crumbling down. And unfortunately, the two forgotten teams always seem to be Washington State and Oregon State, and that still seems to be the case because the rumors right now with the ACC are just centered around Stanford and California. I don't think that's happening, but could you imagine a rival West wing to go to the ACC to mitigate that travel concerns, and then you get really lucky if you are Oregon State. So Oregon State, they do have a lot to offer. It's not anything ridiculously crazy, but if you're comparing programs, they do have a brand new renovation. They have a team that's on the rise. They did get better TV ratings than Washington State last year, I believe, slightly. They were not last in the Pac-12. They were like third last. So either way, that is the current state for Oregon State. Is it going to be the Big 12? Is it going to be the Mountain West? Or is it going to be something even crazier? We will have to see. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.